So with that, I will hand over to my colleague.
Okay. If you forget 99% of what we tell you today, this is the 1% that all of you should remember, the 5 key messages. Okay, so let's move on and look at what they are. The first one is no comment. So if a police officer speaks to you, your safest option is to avoid responding, or you can respond by saying no comment. This is because the police are trained to gather information on you and other protesters. And by speaking to them, you risk incriminating yourself and others. Nobody is legally obliged to speak to the police. Other variations of no comment that you might feel more comfortable with are also totally acceptable. So for instance, you could just shake your head and walk away, or you could say something like, I don't feel like talking. What kinds of information the police might be trying to gather when they're talking to people at a protest? They might be trying to find out who the organiser is, or how long the people at the protest are intending for it to go on. It's definitely not good to give this kind of information. Also, remember that Extinction Rebellion is a network. There are no organisers, and we use consensus decision making. So let's look at the next key message, no personal details. The police often use people's inexperience to get personal information from them, which you're not obliged to give. You don't need to provide the police with any personal details like your name or your date of birth or your address when you're on the street. If you are arrested, then our guidance on this changes later on, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. This also applies to you if you're not a British citizen. You don't need to tell the police anything about your nationality or your visa status. And there's no requirement in the UK to carry ID with you. It's absolutely fine to go out without carrying any ID with you. Some situations in which you do have to give your name and address are when you're being issued with a summons, if you're in charge of a motor vehicle, any person who's involved in a vehicle accident, or in an airport report where there may be bylaws that apply, or if you're issued with a fixed penalty notice. And there is one more exception which is important to remember, which is Section 50 of the Police Reform Act. This can be used by officers to require your details if they believe you are or have been engaging in antisocial behaviour. This is not too common in a protest context, but if the police do ask you to give your personal details under this power, if they say Section 50 of the Police Reform Act, you can ask them which behaviour of yours is antisocial behaviour, and they should then tell you. You might then wish to give your personal details in the moment, and then you can get in touch with us and we can see if we can do anything to challenge it. So the next of the key messages, under what power? The police do not expect you to know the law, so they expect you to believe them when they ask you to do something. So if a police officer asks you to do something, you can ask, am I legally obliged to do so? If they say you are, then you ask, under what power? You should then make a note of the legislation that they state and ask them to explain the legislation to you. And it can also be useful to take down the officer's collar number that identifies them. It's a good way to challenge the police and make sure that they're acting lawfully. There's an exception to this rule. Do not ask under what power if you believe that there's a Section 12 or Section 14 in place under the Public Order Act, as this can be used to incriminate you. We'll talk about this more later on. Okay, the next key message is no duty solicitor. So a duty solicitor is what it says. It's a solicitor who is on duty. So everyone's entitled to legal advice at police stations, and there are solicitors who work on a rota who are just available to give legal advice to people who need it. Once you're taken to the police station, you have the right to talk to a solicitor of your choosing. Okay, you do not have to accept the duty solicitor who's based at the police station you're taken to. Duty solicitors advise anyone, and they are not specialised in the laws around protest. Instead, you should ask for a solicitor who is experienced in advising protesters. And you can find the numbers of such solicitors on BUSTCARDs, which we'll talk about next. You only need to know the name of the solicitor of their firm and not their phone number, because the police can look them up on a switchboard and call them. It's a good idea to write the number and name of a protest experienced solicitor on your arm. Also, write the back office number on your arm too, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. If for some reason a solicitor isn't able to come, be sure to give a no comment interview. This is where you answer no comments to all questions. The police might ask you random questions such as, how was the weather when you were arrested? Although this question might seem fine to answer, they're trying to engage you in conversation with them. Answer no comment to all questions and don't sign anything without consulting a protest law experienced solicitor. And we're going to move on to the final key message, which is no caution. Okay, a caution can feel quite informal. However, accepting a caution is an admission of guilt. It doesn't involve a court appearance, so you're not given the opportunity to argue in court that you're not guilty or give an explanation for what you did. Also, a lot of protesters are arrested and then released and never receive a sentence, which means that their arrest won't necessarily show up on their criminal record. If you accept a caution, this opportunity is gone. Cautions will show up on a DBS check, can affect your job if you work with children or vulnerable adults. There may be some situations in which you do wish to accept a caution. We recommend to only do this after speaking to your protest experienced solicitor. Even if your protest experienced solicitor tells you to accept a caution, ask them why you're an exception to the rule. So usually it won't be in your interests to do it. If your solicitor tells you that you should do it, you need to find out why in this particular circumstance they think that it is in your best interests. Okay, and finally on this one, we're going to quickly mention community resolution orders. It's like an apology for what you've done. You have to make a clear admission of guilt. It is not classed as a conviction, so you don't have any criminal record, but it can be taken into consideration if further offences are committed, and it may be recorded and accessible for police information. Community resolutions tend to be recorded locally at the police station where you were taken. They may still show up on an enhanced DBS check. These are primarily for first-time offenders who admit guilt and the victim's views are taken into account. So again, only accept a community resolution after speaking to a protest experienced solicitor. Okay. If you're arrested at a protest and all you remember is these key messages, you'll be in the best position you could be in. So the best way to remember it, 4 no's and a what. Okay, here's our bust card. It's a very good idea to have a bust card with you at any protest. It provides you with very basic information and the numbers of protest experienced solicitors. Representation at the police station is always free, no matter what the police may tell you. If you're organising local actions, you can look on informed dissent, and we have regional bus cards which may show recommended firms in your local area. Some protesters write the name of a solicitor firm on their arm because it's likely that your belongings will be taken off you, so you may not have access to the bus card if you're arrested and you're at the custody desk.